Welcome to the Soul of Menopause, where we're rewriting the narrative of this transformative journey. From the first hormonal whispers of perimenopause, through menopause and into postmenopause, we're challenging the traditional medical approach that often reduces women's experiences to a set of symptoms. This transition isn't about what we're losing, but who we're becoming. I'm Dr. K. Corpus, and this is the Soul of Menopause.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Soul of Medicine podcast. We're in our second season, Soul of Menopause. And today's guest is someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be thoughtful, responsible, and self-aware, and yet still quietly burned out beneath the surface. Angie Starling has made it her life's work to help people who look perfectly fine on the outside but find themselves tangled in anxiety, perfectionism, and that nagging sense that something's just not quite right. Angie is a licensed therapist, but she's also so much more than that. Before her therapy practice, she taught yoga and meditation, guided wellness retreats, and spent years holding space for transformation through earth-based somatic practices. She brings all of that wisdom, plus her own lived experience with anxiety and panic, into the room with her clients. Angie's approach isn't about fixing yourself or just managing symptoms. It's about going deeper. She helps clients get to the root of their anxiety so they can finally quiet the mental noise, ease the tension in their bodies, and maybe for the first time in years, feel steady, wise, and whole. If you've ever felt stuck, exhausted, and holding it all together, or wondered why you can't just relax even when things are technically fine, Angie's story and her gentle, trauma-informed approach will resonate with you. She believes healing begins the moment you stop managing and start listening to your body, to your emotions, to the parts of you that have been quietly asking for care. So settle in, take a deep breath, and get ready for an honest, nourishing conversation with Angie Starling on the podcast today. Hi, Angie. Thanks for joining us today. I'm really excited about what we're going to talk about and your practice and your journey. How are you feeling with all of that?
Feeling good. Yeah. I'm excited to chat with you.
So you've said, you've often say you're not too much, you're just exhausted from managing it alone. Where did that insight come in from your own life or your practice, and why do you think it hits home with so many women in particular, and especially in this podcast focuses on women in midlife? This is always across the board, I know, and it's actually highlighted, I feel, during midlife and menopause. So where did that resonate, or where did that come in from?
For a lot of women that I work with, and even in my own experience, life has a way of just kind of moving along, and we are dealing with so much day in and day out. And depending on the way that we were raised, the life experiences that we have, we might develop patterns in our way of being and existing that are rooted in things like perfectionism or overthinking or worrying. And so if you are a high functioning woman who's dealt with this for a long time, you find ways of getting by, right? You still show up, you still maybe excel at your career, you're still doing everything you need to do for your family. Maybe you take a yoga class and you meditate and you're doing all of these things, but something still just isn't right. Like you still don't feel like you're living from a really authentic space, or you're not living presently. You're kind of always maybe up in your mind, over worrying, thinking about things. And so there comes a point where maybe there's some things going on that you can't just outthink yourself, right? Or overanalyze your way out of. And so my work with doing coaching and leading women's circles just really brought to my attention that women do so much and manage so much. And sometimes there's just things going underneath that are, if we follow the thread of what they're experiencing today, underneath there's a thread that we follow where there's some deeper work that needs to be done, patterns that need to be kind of worked with, so that we're not just pushing through day in and day out, but we're living life from a more present, authentic space.
I think that's really beautiful. And, during menopause or when physical illness starts to come up, sometimes women come into my practice and they say, I can't do that anymore, or I can't do what I did 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And then they find that something's wrong with them and they pathologize themselves, when in fact, what you're saying is this may be an opportunity to kind of figure out, was that even an authentic way of being? Maybe now at this time, in their life, that kind of authenticity is surfacing, and it's just maybe giving some feedback of like, oh, maybe that wasn't really how I wanted to be or how I wanted to operate.
Yeah, because I think a lot of times we kind of get almost stuck in like this survival mode or this way of just kind of being. And there is something I think that happens in midlife where you get to reassess, and suddenly things are happening and maybe have enough life experience where we're like, wait a minute, I don't know that this is working for me anymore. And I want to live the rest of my life from a space that feels more open and calm and connected. So there's that piece of wisdom that starts to emerge.
And this is a good thing, right? I had a patient actually come in a couple of weeks ago, and I hadn't seen her in maybe a decade. And I said, well, how are you doing? And she's like, I'm meaner. I'm older, I'm meaner, and I just say whatever's, comes to my mind. I'm like, that's great. She's like, no, it's not great. I'm like, that's great. And so there is that shift. The truth is starting to come out, and we've trained people in our lives to do whatever, and we comply, we say yes, blah, blah, blah. And then it comes times when we don't want to pick up the socks anymore. Like it's not okay with us anymore, so it's a little disruptive to the people around, but it's a good thing.
And I think some of the behaviors that are in place, like some things that, anxiety or stress or overthinking, they are behaviors that in some way served us for a very long time, right? They might have pushed you to excel and to do well and get things done. And then there comes a point where it's like, what's underneath that? And that maybe that's that inner wisdom that starts to come out. That's like, maybe we don't want to always live from this space. Maybe there's a way to exist and to still be successful and to still get things done without having this driving force that doesn't feel like a regulated body and brain.
So a lot of people describe feeling fine, as you say, on the outside, but quietly anxious or disconnected underneath. So for someone experiencing that kind of silent burnout, what are the first signs that something deeper needs attention?
I think if you're trying some of the what you might call coping skills, like you're trying things like breathing and you're trying yoga, and they do offer you some relief and you do feel better in those moments, but the same patterns, the same underlying stress and anxiety is still humming under the surface. I think that's a pretty good sign that we're dealing with a deeper pattern of behavior that's probably, a lot of people don't realize, is rooted often in either childhood or just life experiences that we picked up along the way that have impacted the way that our nervous system developed and functions in our day-to-day life. So I love a good breathing technique, and I love yoga. And I like to pair those with work that is addressing maybe some negative beliefs about ourselves that we picked up along the way that we might not even be super conscious of, but are driving some of these patterns. So, for example, there might be a feeling of, I'm not good enough, which propels you to be that perfectionist or to push yourself really hard, or even maybe have a critical voice that's trying to motivate you in some way. And so it's a really beautiful opportunity to kind of get to the root of the matter.
Yes. And so you talk about getting to the root of the matter, of the anxiety, rather than just managing these symptoms. So what does that look like in your work? And could you describe, what that process would look like?
I use a combination of mindfulness and somatic therapy and internal family systems to help people get to identify basically the different parts of themselves. So we have, different thought patterns, different feelings, or what I like to call parts in this work. And it could be like the inner critic, or the people pleaser or the perfectionist. And so the work I like to do helps you get curious and listen to these parts from a place of compassion instead of judgment. And what happens when we start to get curious is we start to uncover why these things started showing up in the first place and what they're trying to do for you. Even though it doesn't feel good, often they have a really good positive intention behind them. It's just the way they manifest doesn't feel very healthy. And so we really get curious with those parts of ourselves. And at the same time, we're trying to nurture a connection to what I call the authentic self, which is the part of you that is undamaged and unburdened. It's calm, it's confident, it's compassionate to others, but also to yourself. And that at the same time is what we could call a regulated nervous system. So that means you're not in fight or flight and you're not shut down, numbed out, and unmotivated. You're in that sweet space in between. So while we get curious with the behaviors and feelings and anxiety and things that we're having, at the same time, we're really fostering a connection to that part of yourself that feels really safe and loving and kind, because that is the inner healer. And that's the part of you, the core of you really, that can show up and be with these other feelings and validate them and start to shift.
So many of our listeners, thank you for that, have been in therapy before or tried different coping tools like you've mentioned, but still feel that stuckness. So could you explain the difference? And I've had to do this a lot with my patients too, the difference between sort of talk therapy or that cognitive therapy, talk therapy, and the somatic work. And then now with this internal family systems work, because I think it starts to get into these deeper layers. That's where the root of it is.
We can cognitively know something to be true. So talk therapy, sometimes we get in there and we're just kind of talking about stuff. And a lot of my clients are smart and they're intellectuals. And so they can intellectualize their experiences. They can explain what's happened to them. They can maybe draw some connections and cognitively know what might be happening. At the same time, we can have an emotional disconnection or emotional stuckness in our psyche, in our nervous system, that can cognitively know something to be true. Like, I know that I'm good enough, right? I know that I show up in the world and I'm a kind person and I do well by my family and my work. But emotionally, there might be a part of them that doesn't fully realize that. And so it shows up in these other patterns of like working too hard, inner criticism. And so if we are just talking about what's happening and not going into the body and letting ourselves really connect and feel how that stuff shows up, we're kind of missing that deeper work, because the physical body is a wonderful trailhead into exploring some of those deeper patterns that have been in place. Very different than just surface level reframing a negative thought or employing a breathing technique. It's really getting underneath all of those things and saying, what's hurt underneath? How did your nervous system start to adapt in a way that continues to show up as anxiety or overthinking now? And can we start connecting to the physical body and to even the inner child a lot of times, to start recognizing that pain, validating it, loving on it, so that it can shift and it doesn't have to keep showing up in the way that it does in your day-to-day life.
Angie, could you go more into inner child work? Because I find that to me, it's everything. And we're just kind of kids, our inner children, like walking around on a daily basis. And that's kind of what's showing up, particularly in relationships and things like that. That's the part of us that you're saying is probably triggered, or is probably, it's not our adult self necessarily, but that inner child that didn't get the nurturing or the attunement that we needed back then, that just keeps showing up. Could you go more into that and how you address that with your clients?
Yeah, absolutely. So what we know to be true is when you're a child, your brain, your body, your nervous system are developing. And so if there are things that happen in your childhood, things with attachment to your caregivers. Our caregivers are really supposed to provide emotional safety, physical safety, all of those things. If you're raised in an environment where maybe you had everything provided for you physically, maybe, all that stuff was taken care of, but you had a caregiver who wasn't as emotionally available, or you felt like maybe love was conditional sometimes, whether on your performance or being well behaved. Your nervous system starts to adapt to that. And it starts to put these things in place to kind of protect you from being hurt. Because as a child, we are naturally in our authentic selves, right? We are open, we're carefree, we're just naturally compassionate. And unfortunately, there are circumstances and situations where that's not safe to be in that space. So then the brain steps in and it puts something in place to kind of protect us and to keep us safe. And that could look like, I'm going to start monitoring people's behavior so I can see if maybe they're in a bad mood, and I'm going to do what I need to do to prevent that from escalating, right? And that's how we start with people pleasing. So when you're a child and your nervous system is developing, all these things are happening subconsciously, right? They're just occurring. And you might start picking up some beliefs about yourself, like, I have to be a good girl in order for people to like and love me. I have to make sure I don't cause any trouble. I have to make sure I work really hard. I have to make sure that I'm making other people happy, because if other people are happy, then I'm happy. And so when those things, when somebody's mad at you when you're a child, then you think, oh, there's something wrong with me because I didn't do what I needed to do to make this adult in my life happy. And so then you hold on to that, and that stays kind of stuck inside. And so as you grow and mature and other things happen, right, that belief almost gets like a little more rooted in and stays with you. And so what I like to do with folks is, first, we often have to start with the behavior that's there first, like the people pleasing or the feeling like you're responsible for other people's emotions, and let our brains know we actually have to update ourselves and let our brains know we're not that little girl anymore. We're actually this adult woman who's not in that same environment or has new support tools, is living a very different life. And so when we do that, we find that those behaviors start to kind of step back a little bit. And then we could give access to the inner child. And then when we have access to the inner child, we just witness our younger self. And we see whatever her experience was. We communicate with her. She might show us things in images or words. Thoughts might just kind of arise spontaneously, where we see the experiences that she had. We validate them. And then we find out what she didn't get at that time that she really needed. And then we start to reparent, and we start to provide that for her internally. And maybe at the same time, we do some things in our external world that also kind of support that. So we might watch a show that we watched when we were a kid, or start picking up a hobby or an activity that we liked to do when we were younger, as a way of kind of deepening that connection. And so as we deepen that connection with the younger self, really starts to trust that we have her, that we love her, that we will always be there for her. And that negative belief that she's held on to becomes less and less strong until basically she lets it go.
That's so beautiful. And, for myself, I discovered this work probably about 5 years ago, as I was going through menopause, as I was going through a divorce. And those are the things that kind of force you to go in and like figure out what the heck is going on. But on a daily basis, I mean, to me, it's just simply like, you're okay, you're safe, you're okay, you're loved. I mean, it's like a tape that I have to consciously remind my inner child, I call her LK, little K, to, and as an adult, it's like, what are you? Like, why are you, but it is that little part of you that is just kind of freaked out a little bit, or a lot, that needs that nurturing. And yeah, and once people can make that connection, that, you learn how to self-soothe and take care of that part of you. And that's what the parts work is. And it's very empowering.
And for some folks, you do have to do the somatic, the physical work at the same time, because there could be a lot of things in place that when you start to think about your experiences, you get flooded, right? You feel anxious, or you might check out and you just can't think straight. You might disassociate, or you might feel really numb, even trying to kind of begin this work. And so that's where some of the somatic therapy comes in, because we realize that we're getting really big cues that our bodies don't quite feel safe for this work yet, even though we know it's safe and we know that we can handle these emotions. We have to be really mindful and loving with the parts that show up really strongly in our physical bodies as well.
So what is perfectionism and what is that overthinking? I think that can be glorified quite a bit of just like, I'm type A and I do this and everything has to be blah, 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 blah. And, there is an impact. I was just going to say this earlier when you said that activation of the nervous system, it also activates your adrenals. So I see this in my practice a lot, and that those things might not be going on like the tiger chasing you now, but those thoughts and things could still activate cortisol, right? Which chronically elevated causes the inflammation and decreased immune system, which causes all of those physical issues. So what is that perfectionism and overthinking? Because it does activate the nervous system and chronically. Yeah. Can we unpack that a little bit for our listeners? Because I know there are a lot of us.
The way that perfectionism and overthinking shows up, it shows up very similarly amongst most people. The reason behind it, though, can be very individualistic. It is usually a protective mechanism, a protective part of us that is striving for perfectionism, right? It's, I can't get anything wrong, because if I were to get this wrong, or if I were to fail, what would that say about me? Or what would that make me feel about myself? And for a lot of people, it means I'm not good enough, or just the feeling of being a failure. And if you even trace that, further back, for some people, if they were to fail, that might mean that somebody's disappointed in them. And if somebody's disappointed in them, maybe they won't think about them the same way. They'll think about them differently. Think about them differently, they won't love them. And then you're back to that little kid that's feeling like, I have to do all these things right because I have to make people see that I'm good enough, that I am worth love. So that's just one example. But how perfectionism, some people wear it as a badge of honor, right? Like, I'm a hard worker, I do all these things, I get these things done, I do things well. And if you start to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, you're like, well, what's the fear if you didn't do that? What's the fear? What would happen if you gave a B+ effort? And then people are like, what? That's low. That's not allowed. Why is that not allowed? And we start to kind of trace it back, follow the thread.
It's such an Asian thing to get like an A-, like that's like the Asian F, And so when I talk to my Asian friends, one of them was like, we were good in math because we were smart. It's like we would get in trouble if we weren't good in math. Like there were like physical consequences. I was thinking about that. It's not even a disappointment. It's like you would literally get yelled at, or, which today would be considered more than just discipline. It's cultural, so.
And what happened to your nervous system when you were getting yelled at?
Gosh, it's just like freak out, shut down, and, doing everything to be hyper. And then I think about it, okay, to be hyper vigilant about not making a mistake, right? Or getting in trouble, blah, blah, blah. I'm following the threads right now. It's just, and I find myself sometimes people ask me like, how'd you do? I'm like, well, it wasn't perfect. You know what I mean? It wasn't perfect. I'm like, okay, calm down. Like, nothing's perfect. But that really does.
Your nervous system remembers that, right?
Yeah.
It remembers that experience. So now as an adult, when you're faced with a situation and you're like, this isn't perfect, all that stuff starts coming up. And it's not about this necessarily right now, right? It's about how all that stuff has been carried along with you. And that's what's being activated even now. Yeah.
And I think that coupled with, hormonal changes or fatigue, you just can't anymore. You cannot, because it takes energy to keep up that identity of being perfect. And then all of a sudden it's just like, I can't anymore. And then that makes you feel even worse because you can't anymore, because we've created this life that looks like perfect and you just can't keep up the perfection. So what's the antidote? Yeah. So how does one approach that when it's like, if you're imperfect and that doesn't feel safe, is there a stepwise way of sort of creating that safety net, that maybe even being messy is what we need to be, but it's like, oh no, I could never. How do you undo that in somebody?
I think the first thing is that you have to have awareness of of the behavior, and then awareness of what it's trying to do. So it might be like in our example, right? It might be preventing you from feeling like what you're going to get in trouble or feeling like, you failed. And so you can, when we realize like, oh, I have this part of me that shows up that fears if I don't do this exactly perfectly, that I'm going to be a failure, or I'm going to somehow like feel like I'm in trouble, or that I'm just not like doing this right. I know that's been there for a long time, right? Like I realize that that's what's happening. And as soon as you kind of have awareness just in that moment, like, oh, this is a pattern that's been playing out, this is what's showing up, it gives you a little bit of space from it. You're not like flooded in it where you're just like thinking that I have to do it this way. You're almost like observing the behavior. And when you can observe it, you've got that separation from it. And so then you can start to kind of work with it. So that is huge, is being able to recognize even in the moment that this is happening and I know why it's happening. And then we start to interject a little bit of self-compassion instead of self-criticism. That's not easy to do, and that takes time. But when we can start to understand that this isn't just me right now worrying about this. This is the little girl inside of me that's afraid she's going to get in trouble if we don't get this right, or she's afraid she's, all going to feel all those feelings that are going to come up. They're going to feel really overwhelming. So, of course, this behavior shows up because we don't want to feel that way, right? We want to avoid that feeling. So we maintain this perfectionist behavior to prevent us from feeling those other things when we weren't going. So I think that's like the first big step, is having that connection and that awareness. And then it takes some time. This is where the true healing work is, where we start kind of going back in and being with that part of ourselves that we know, that younger part that's feeling like, oh, I have to get this done, because if I don't, then all these other bad feelings are going to show up. And we meet her with compassion. Because you think about, if you're with, however, an internal child that's 6 or 8 or 10, and you think about meeting any 6 or 8 or 10-year-old, how you would communicate with them if they were telling you that I'm so afraid I'm going to get in trouble, or I feel like I have to do this perfectly. Kind of start talking to yourself like you would talk to that child that is in front of you, and validate their experience.
Yes, absolutely. So when you say awareness, I think sometimes when we're hijacked, we don't stop for a second and then go down that pathway that you said. And so, you also have this background in yoga, meditation, and earth-based practices. Do you find that, practicing those things on a daily basis, or having some kind of that already like embodied within you to know, like, okay, I'm free. There's a difference between freak out mode and then this other baseline of down regulation, which yoga, breath work, meditation all can help give us. How important do you find that combining that work to actually know how to be aware, then with the therapy work that you do, which I think is such a gorgeous combination, which I can see it all playing in beautifully. How do these help shape people to, help people reconnect with themselves and their bodies, with these other practices that you have experience with?
I think it is still absolutely necessary as a daily practice if we can. Yeah. And we work, and that's a big thing I work with people, is sometimes even picking up a daily practice feels like, oh my gosh, right? So we address things that might be getting in the way of that. But you're absolutely right. Because when you take 5 minutes a day to do some breath work, so you get to create your own inner visualization, and these practices we know start to calm your nervous system. You're basically retraining your nervous system to enter into that state, right? And at the same time, it's like creating new neural pathways, because right now, most people in this situation, they've been living in one way of, I have this experience and then this thought, and I just kind of loop in this anxious cycle. And so we're kind of interjecting that and saying, well, what if for 5 minutes a day we do this breath work, we do visualization, we do maybe legs up the wall yoga pose or something else, to remind your brain and your body what coming into calm and stillness feels like. Because the more that you can do that, the easier it comes. So that if you're doing it consistently, you're giving your brain and your body this beautiful opportunity to really just with intention come into the space, so that when things start to escalate, because you're right, in those moments, you are flooded by adrenaline and cortisol. And if you don't have this practice on a regular basis, and in the moment you just try to breathe your way through it, it's it's really hard to match that physical process that happens. Yeah.
It's nice to have it in your back pocket so you know how to access that. But if you don't know what that is, and you're told to breathe and you don't know how to breathe, it's going to be really hard to do that. So that's really great.
If you are practicing it somewhat consistently, when you need it, you have a much easier access to it. It's actually more beneficial because you've got this ongoing connection to it. It's like this, oh yeah, we know what this is like. We've been doing this a little bit regularly. So it's easier to utilize in those moments where you do feel flooded and overwhelmed, and you can kind of separate enough to have a little bit of awareness of what's happening in the moment for you to begin those internal conversations.
Okay, so for somebody who's always been that strong one in the family or the caretaker, what's the first step for allowing themselves to receive support and to start healing? Because a lot of them, from a practical standpoint, they're tired, they're done, and they feel bad because they can't give anymore. Exhaustion and resentment, honestly. And when you tell them it's your turn, that sounds nice, but again, the stuff that's going on in their bodies of why they did that is still there. So, or it's that kind of example, are there caretakers in the family and the ones doing everything? How does one start to approach healing and from that perspective?
Well, I always like the example, and you've probably heard this, of when you're getting your safety instructions on your flight before you take off. They always say that if you're traveling with a child, to put your oxygen mask on first before you put on the child, because if you're passed out, you can't help your child. And so I kind of think of it the same way. Like, if it's a really hard struggle for you to think about, well, I can't prioritize myself right now, I've got all these other things. We can definitely even discuss that, right? We even look at where did that start from, and we can investigate that. But if that is even a hurdle, thinking about helping yourself so you can be there in the best capacity that you can for your loved ones. It's like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so at some point, how you are feeling internally does start to come out around those, to those around you. So, you might notice that you're being short, or you're not being as understanding or compassionate, and you are feeling completely exhausted. And so sometimes we have to think, like, maybe I need to do this, not just for myself, but so that I can be the partner, the parent, that I really want to be. Because at this point, this is affecting me, and it might also be affecting, those around you, in the sense that you're not able to live from that more authentic space, if that makes sense.
So could you share a turning point in your own journey with anxiety, and maybe a moment when you realized move from just coping to true healing?
Yeah, I think for myself, I've gone through my own therapy, and it's one of the reasons that I am doing the work that I'm doing now, because I experienced not just managing and coping, but the true transformation of a way of being and existing that happens with therapy. And I think for me, it came when I made the connection that my panic and my anxiety were showing up in an attempt to keep me safe from being emotionally harmed in ways that I had been in my past. And when I made that connection and I put some things in place that felt really emotionally safe to me, and worked on my inner child, then those behaviors all of a sudden, well, panic just stopped for me. And then the anxiety just got less and less and less as I was building this self trust, that the anxiety that was showing up for me, it didn't have to work so hard, because I was doing these practices and I was connecting with my younger parts in a way that it saw that I was taking care of me too. I being my authentic, calm, regulated self, and that it didn't have to show up so strongly anymore, because it trusted this inner love and wisdom to take care of things and to handle things in a way that I hadn't been able to in the past.
So what does it feel like when somebody starts to come home to themselves after years of holding everything together?
Yeah, I think it feels like a sense of ease and a lot of understanding for yourself, um, a lot more self-love and self-compassion, and you start to live from this space where overthinking and anxiety, or depression, whatever it is, it's not driving the bus every day. It's not how you move through the world, and so you feel more grounded and stable and not as affected by things. Call that your window of tolerance gets widened. So the window of tolerance is also being in that regulated nervous system state, is also being in your authentic self. So when you come home to yourself, you're not as affected by others' behaviors, even others' words as much, because you realize this could be about them and not about me, because you've released some of those negative beliefs about yourself to think that, oh, this is something that's wrong with me. And you start to realize I'm inherently good, and I'm inherently wise and loving, and some of these other things that happen externally, it's not about me, and I can live from a place that feels more confident and whole.
So if a listener hears this and thinks, that's me, you're talking about me, but I'm so tired, I don't know where to start, what would you tell them?
So just have a moment to let yourself feel your exhaustion and your tiredness, and to recognize that those feelings aren't an indicator that something's wrong with you. It's an indication that you've been dealing with a lot for a really long time, and it's signs that it's a sign that maybe we need to do a little inner love and a little inner healing work, because all the things that show up for us and the way that we are moving through the world are there usually for a reason, and understanding just that pushing things away, trying to force them to not be where they are, or talk critically to ourselves is not a conducive environment to healing. We need validation and we need love. And if you're struggling with that, that's a beautiful place to start with therapy too.
So Angie, if somebody's listening right now and thinking I need your kind of support, that kind of support, what's the best way for them to find you and to healing journey with you?
They can check out my website, angiestarlingtherapy.com. Got some info on there, and there's an option to reach out to me, and I might join initial, just a free 15-minute chat to see if it feels like it's a good fit, and go from there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I love the work that you do. I've seen your journey over the years, and I'm really just impressed. I'm inspired, and I'm really happy for you. And I can feel it. I can feel, the depth of your work because of, your own work that you've done. So it's really beautiful. So congratulations.
I'll say thank you to you too, because I've worked with you. And I feel like these things do complement each other, because we're not just managing symptoms, right? We're healing nervous systems, you're healing body systems. It's a missing piece for a lot of people. So
Absolutely. Thank you.
Today's conversation is just one thread in the larger tapestry of our shared experience. Help us spread the word. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, rate us on your favorite podcast platform, or tag us on social media. We're at Corpus MD, and we want to build a community that transforms how we understand this incredible life stage. Find more resources and connect with us at kcorpusmd.com. Trust your body, embrace your wisdom. I'm Dr. K, and this is the Soul of Medicine podcast.